Got a full house, which is great. My name's Ian. I'm the treasurer of Southam's Friends of the Earth. Welcome to this joint event with Transition Town Totnes. We've got a very entertaining speaker lined up for you, and a very important speaker as well. Just say thanks very much for the donations. We will, if you've left your details, email you membership forms for Southam's Friends of the Earth. It's £5 for the year, and as you probably know, we are very active in local campaigns around a whole host of issues. The last event was around fracking, and we have more events coming up this year, so we'll keep you informed of those. We look forward to seeing you. We're going to have tea and coffee at the end. I'll pass you over to the Mayor of Totnes, Jackie Hodson, to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Thank you very much, Ian. I feel really honoured and privileged to be able to introduce tonight's speaker. This is an international negotiator who braves the highways and byways of the international circuit. And as you're seeing, often you have to use interesting methods to actually draw attention to what you're saying or who you are. But it's really not easy at times to work on that level, to actually brave some of those places. Stuart was in Lima in December. Many of you will have heard about the climate talks in Peru just before Christmas. And it's very difficult. You need to know what's going on. You need to have the ready answers. You need to have the sound bites. You need to be all things to all people. And to actually find the places for intervention is not easy. And I think we should really be aware of what the challenges are when you start to put yourself at that level. So, Stuart Scott, believe it or not, is the Deputy Director General of the International Ecological Safety Collaborative Organisation, known as IESCO. He's an international educator, public speaker, an advisor, a strategist on climate change, sustainability and ecological safety. His previous experience includes associate of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, participant at United Nations climate negotiations, formerly Chief Ecological Officer at Naga Corp Limited, which was in Hong Kong, and the first environmentalist stockbroker on Wall Street in 1977. So, it's a long list. He's also the founder of an information technology consultancy to New York City major banks and university instructor in mathematics, statistics and critical thinking. I would say very useful background for the kind of challenges that he faces. As I said, he recently presented at the United Nations COP20 in Peru, Rethinking Economics in the Age of Climate Change. He's the founder of Transition University in Hawaii. He's undertaken transition training here in Totnes, I think that was 2 or 3 years ago. And he also established the Interfaith Declaration of Climate Change. I'll give you a quote from Stuart. There is a natural tendency for humans to be in denial about our own mortality, both individually and collectively. That is, of course, exacerbated by the fossil fuel and other business interests that want to keep us buying stuff, chained to loans, and just generally increasing the wealth of the wealthy and depleting the stocks and natural resources and waste things that remain, if any remain, in the case of the atmospheric carbon sink. But even after we recognise the mortal threat we face, the denial shifts to dejection. That is the part we have to turn into action. And we have to trigger a social tipping point where governments will act on behalf of the well-being of the people. So I'm really honoured tonight to welcome Stuart out over there, who not only has all this seriousness, but as you can see, combines a sense of fun. And I will share with you that this afternoon, in my chains, Stuart and Kit and Stephen, representing Friends of the Earth, we walked up and down Totnes for a couple of hours, and we gave out little leaflets promoting tonight's talk. And it was very interesting how people responded. Children are very ready to just jump into Stuart's arms, to want to be photographed. There was lots of youngsters from the can actually combine that sense of fun, reality, and how we approach people with that high level of talking and representing us, regular people, at high level places. So thank you and welcome, and we look forward to the talk.
This reminds me of a presentation that I gave a couple of years ago at one of the most wasteful celebrations on the planet, something called Burning Man. Perhaps you've heard of it. 60 some odd thousand people come together in the high desert outside of Reno, Nevada. They build a city in about a week, and then they live in it for a week with all kinds of excess. And then they tear it apart and haul it away, and they don't leave a trace. But they burn these huge structures at the end, the huge wooden man, the Burning Man. And it's like, why? So I held off going for years, and finally a friend talked me into going. And I was going to be there nearby, I was going to be nearby, so I didn't have the excuse of the carbon of my flight, and I went. And I had 4 presentation opportunities there. And I went to the first one, and I said, oh my God, how am I going to do this? It's called Center Camp, big circular building. There's naked yoga going on over there. There's a music stage over there. There's coffee and hot chocolate over there. And it's the only thing you can buy in Burning Man is ice to keep your food fresh, and coffee in the center camp. Everything else is a gifting economy. It's a strange animal. So I said, how am I going to do a presentation on the spoken word stage and keep the attention of this audience? I came up with an idea. I came up on stage. I asked for someone to hold a mic for me. I needed a mic stand. They said, oh, there's a stick. I said, no, I need you to follow my head around. I was dressed in jeans and sweatshirt, sloppy dress. And I proceeded to do my rap while I undressed to my underwear and then put on a suit and tie with the Windsor knot without missing the beat. And I said that was part of it. I mean, it wasn't just a gimmick. The point of my doing that is that the problem, there are no evil people trying to do us all in. And the people who you would want to point a finger at, the people who wear suits and ties and work on Wall Street perhaps, the bankers, they are trapped in this matrix that we've created as much as we are. And so I can't afford to make anybody the bad guy. Because I wanted everybody to see that I'm the same person whether I'm wearing, whether I'm wearing that or I'm wearing this. We're all in this together. I want to thank you all for coming. Did anybody come because they received one of those flyers today on the street? Okay, good. Excellent. Excellent. I just wanted to have that feel of whether, it was good PR or not. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to try to start us off in a high place, a little bit happy, because we're going to go down and then come back up. Now, this is the symbol of an organization that is, I'm not sure I'll need it, but this is the symbol of an organization that I created. It's called the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative. Now, it came out of a project I started in 2009, the Interfaith Declaration on Climate Change. Now, during 2009, I had this epiphany that even though there's a physical description of the problem, greenhouse gases, that the cause, a primal cause, is that we're trying to fill externally what we're feeling the lack of internally, that there's a spiritual gap or something, and that So society caters to that and wants to sell us stuff that will make us feel more complete. If you only buy this, or if you only go there, that will make you happy. And I realized, well, if there's a spiritual cause, then there's a spiritual solution. Okay, so I came out with a one-page document called the Interfaith Declaration on Climate Change. It was very successful. We got a very, very good play in the press. The United Nations said, please keep this up, it's very useful. But we wanted to even grow it bigger than just spirit. We wanted to grow it to include science, because this is a rare event when not only are religions and various faith traditions in a great deal of consensus, but science has the same conclusion. We've got a problem. So now we're the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative. I subsequently got a commission to be the Deputy Director General of this prestigious sounding organization. The headquarters is in Beijing. They have an office in New York. I'm probably the most active person in the whole organization. And I have a loose relationship. They don't pay me, but they give me license, and they have a UN relationship. So it's a good jumping off point. I keep in touch with them. But I have as my territory the entire North America and the entire subject of climate change. Oh, okay, that suits me. So, let's go back to Mother Earth. And I'm going to show you a symbol. This is something that I came up with a couple of years ago. That understanding that at the core of our problem, and I'll return to this, is our economic system and the way we've created money. This is something that my experience with transition actually contributed to, but the epiphany finally came some years later, that if you could reboot money, if you could reboot our economic concept, how we deal with the world, you could reboot the world. And so the symbol of rebooting the world became very important to me. Now, as was mentioned, I was the first environmental stockbroker on Wall Street, as far as I know. Yes, please, if you would, silence your phones, put them on stun, I'd like to say. And if you have any questions, save them for the end. I'll remain even after everyone has to go. My email address I'll display at the end also, and I welcome you to get in touch. So I was the first environmental stockbroker in 1977-78 when Merrill Lynch would not support. They said, it's a good idea, but you can't do it here because the companies are too small, and we are the thundering herd. If we recommended one of these small companies, we would overwhelm their stock with an influx of capital. So I went on to other things in my life. I was not really into the stock market. It was a means to an end, but it was a very good education. This is a photo of me in 2012, a couple of Decembers ago, at a conference called the World Ecological Safety Assembly. So I was still doing it after 40 years. And this is what got me the commission with the International Ecological Safety Collaborative Organization, ESCO. They ran this conference, and I gave a keynote. They gave me 15 minutes. 15 minutes? So I went for 45. And the head of the organization left about halfway through, Chinese man. I did see him come back. I had a little waiver. That evening he came and he apologized to me through his translator. He said I had brought him to tears. An element of what I do is performance art, but a very serious performance art. I synthesize everything I've done in my life. I was a stage magician when I was 14, so I know how to work with the heart of an audience. Thank you for being here. The next thing I want to show you very briefly, this is just preamble before we really get into it. This was an article that I picked up in the online New York Times just late last year, before going to Lima, Peru, actually. This was November 30th, was, I believe, the first day of Lima or the day before Lima. When I say Lima, it's the annual conference of parties where the nations of Earth are arguably negotiating a treaty which may save us. Now, the bad news is that even if they came out with a successful treaty this year, it's not strong enough, right?
because the way it's been constituted, the policymakers have made sure that their feet would not be held too close to the fire. And we'll go into more why that is. But what was very interesting about this article was that, quote, even with a deal to stop the current rate of greenhouse gas emissions, scientists warned the world will become increasingly unpleasant. But then the author went on to say, without a deal, they say, the world could eventually become uninhabitable for humans. That, in the New York Times, was a watershed. There are very few newspapers that are printing anything that is nearly that dire in its pronouncement. We need to grapple with that. We have to get our arms around the fact that this is a mortal threat before we can move to action, perhaps. So, let's go to a little bit of the science, and I'm going to what I call the gun going off. Let's look at the Arctic, and I'll take just 2 data points. September, late summer of 1984, that's the extent of the Arctic ice pack. And a few years later, in September of 2012. Now, just in case you think that I'm playing with the data and giving you 2 years that show a false trend, that is the data. The lowest jagged line is September. Scientists a few years ago realized that it was not a linear decay of sea ice, it was an exponential decay of sea ice, and they started to draw curves. And so there is a chance that as soon as next summer, we may see an ice-free Arctic. Maybe a couple more years. Let's not quibble about a couple of years. The ice-free condition in the Arctic is extremely dangerous. The Arctic keeps the planet cool. When people say, oh, we had a cold winter, there's no global warming, my response is, well, when you have iced tea, it stays ice until the ice melts, and then the tea starts to warm, and we're melting the ice cubes in our tea. We're melting the Arctic right now. Now, that area, again, this is a polar projection looking down, is the East Siberian Arctic shelf. This is where the gun is going off. It's a narrow piece of land. It's a couple of hundred, I can use miles here. I forget, I have to go back and forth miles to kilometers. It's about 1,500 miles long, and maybe a couple hundred miles out. And at its deepest, before it falls off, it's about 200 feet deep. So it's shallow. It's a submerged ledge that was above water during previous ice ages. And there was a very rich fauna and flora there at times, ancient times, epochs gone by. Now, when you digest organic material in the presence of oxygen, you get CO2 and water vapor, H2O, and trace minerals that go back to the soil or the ocean. But when you digest organic matter in the absence of oxygen, anaerobic conditions, either underground or underwater, you get methane, CH4, which is a greenhouse gas that is from 150 to 200 times as powerful at trapping heat as CO2 during the first year that it's emitted. Once it's out in the air, it starts to degrade. So over a 20-year period, the average is about 80 or 90 times as powerful greenhouse gas as CO2. Over a 100-year period, it's about 20 to 30 times. So you'll see that figure represented differently. And the difference is the time scale. One of the problems we have is expressing very complex relationships to people who don't have the scientific training. That's partly my function. So, in 2007, there were several hundred plumes of methane that were discovered when scientists went out into the East Siberian Arctic shelf. Now, some of them are 150 kilometers across. Again, the notation of 86 times as powerful as the 20-year time frame. Was that too loud? No, okay. What you were seeing was young people on a frozen lake in Alaska. Their teacher had brought them out there. It's what I call Arctic fireworks. You go out, you find a thinning spot in the ice cover on the lake, puncture a hole and light it and hope that you don't get blown away, because you're not sure what's under there. And there are lots and lots of these. There's YouTube's online now that you can find. It may be fun, but it's actually a very dangerous sign. Because, again, that methane is being emitted not just in those lakes, but over a huge expanse.
For the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a joint Russian-Alaskan expedition going out into the Siberian Sea and observing this, and they've been seeing great plumes of methane bubbling up all over the Siberian Sea. The whole zone of millions of square miles of territory is now releasing all of its methane cover.
Peter Watkins has been studying the Arctic ice cap for about 40 years. He goes out regularly in British Navy submarines under the Arctic and focuses the radar, the sonar upward to study the ice pack. He's got over 300 peer-reviewed papers. He is the authority on sea ice. And he is, as I will show you in a few moments, quite shocked by what's going on up there. He doesn't have a speech impediment, maybe a slight lisp, but that millions of square miles is just, it's mind-boggling what the scientists are seeing. Now, Dr. Natalia Shakova is a Russian scientist who works for the University of Alaska Fairbanks, so she's the lead scientist in a team that goes out regularly to the East Siberian Arctic Shelf, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year. Very dangerous conditions. They got in trouble one year, and a couple of Russian Coast Guard vessels tried to come to their rescue. One of the vessels sunk. They were okay. The scientists survived, but one vessel with all aboard actually died, and she has subsequently dedicated her work, some of her papers, to the team that died. Here's her words.
So the methane in the atmosphere, the total amount of methane in the atmosphere, in the current atmosphere, it's about 5 gigatons. The amount of carbon preserved in form of methane in the Eastern Arctic shelf is approximately from hundreds to thousands of gigatons. And of course, it's only 1% of that amount is required to double the atmospheric burden of methane. But to destabilize 1% of this carbon pool, I think it's not much effort needed, considering that the state of permafrost and the amount of methane currently involved.
She went on at that interview to say something else.
Shortly speaking, we do not like what we see there. Absolutely do not like.
And look at the end there. She's a mother. Her family is in Siberia. And I'm told that there's a Russian scientist in the employ of the government who attends all of her public briefings. So there's controls on what she can say. She has to be understated. Now, she and her team estimate the volume of methane currently being released at 50 gigatons. She says from hundreds to thousands of gigatons are there in that Siberian Arctic shelf, from hundreds to thousands. So she's estimating a 1% release. And they've modeled it as 5 gigatons per year for the next 10 years to see what that would do. Now, that's what 50 gigatons looks like with the zeros. And if you say a ton, 2,000 pounds, a lot more zeros than that. It's a huge amount of gas. It's 10 times the amount of methane that's currently in the entire atmosphere of Earth. But when you add all that methane to all the CO2 that's already up there, it would have the effect of more than doubling the greenhouse gas content of Earth. So we would go from the current 400 parts per million of CO2 equivalent to above 800 parts per million. See, that's not a level that we can survive.
At the moment, we have to rely on Shakover and Semiletov, who've been doing that work, and they have then expert knowledge of seabed conditions, and they're the ones who are estimating the 50 gigatons. So that could be revised up or down if further work is done in that area.
And do you think civilization could survive a 50 gigaton release of methane?
No, I don't think it can. I think that if you look at the existing predictions of global warming rates, what's kind of eerie is the fact that the business as usual projections, even the cautious ones produced by IPCC, are still giving us about 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and with 2 degrees has been taken arbitrarily as the level beyond which nasty things happen. I don't know why 2 degrees, but that would be reached by the middle of the century, 4 degrees by the end of the century. Now, 4 degrees, people who calculated what that would do to food production, to die-off of forests, to acceleration of warming due to various extra feedbacks that kick in, the general conclusion is pretty dire, that if you get to 4 degrees of warming, then collapse of civilization is what's going to happen, because the world won't be able to sustain anywhere near its present population. So the result will be chaos and warfare. So that's just the eerie thing is that that's predicted by the IPCC report, but the projection of warming by the end of the century is 4 degrees. But nowhere do they state at all that 4 degrees is a catastrophe for economically and socially for the planet. And now with this Arctic methane, you're simply adding another element to the warming, even if it's only an extra 0.6. That brings forward the date at which catastrophic warming is achieved by maybe 20 years.
So, the IPCC report, the scientific document that the nations of Earth are negotiating toward or under, has been dumbed down a bit. They don't state that their predictions are as dire, because the politicians don't want, essentially, to be pressed into doing something that is arguably politically and economically, well, let's say, challenging. Now, let me show you 2 polar projections. This is data from a study of the atmosphere above the Arctic. On the left, methane levels, November of 2008, and on the right, November of 2012. These are the millions of square miles of territory that are currently releasing their methane cover. And I'll call your attention to the lead scientist, Dr. Ira Leifer. He's a Russian, an American, and a Chinese scientist collaborate on this. And I'll show you a statement that he made a little over a year ago, and I broke it into 3 parts. Some scientists are indicating we should make plans to adapt to a 4-degree hotter world. While prudent one wonders what portion of humanity could adapt to such a world. My view is that it's just a few thousand individuals seeking refuge in the Arctic or Antarctica. We face a very extreme change. Perhaps the loss of billions of people, if we're lucky, just the loss of billions of people. We have to change the business as usual trajectory. It's a huge undertaking. Is it possible? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No. But the people in this room are going to be critical for it. Now, I very hurriedly deliberately changed the last part of my presentation for this audience because I realized this is a different audience. This is where transition was born. This is kind of the center of the universe in a certain dimension, center of change. So we'll come to that, what I'm recommending. So, let me go back. There we go. I have 4 maps to show you. The first one is the preceding decade, the first decade of this century. And then we'll see the 1/3 point, 2/3 point, and the final decade of this century. And so just watch the red tones and the purple tones. In 2030 through 39, it will look like this. In 2060 to 69, it will look like this. And in 2090 to 99, looks like that. Agriculture in the United States, toast. Agriculture in the Mediterranean, toast. Large parts of South America, including the Amazon, very challenged. Southern Africa, very challenged. Where will those people go? There will be huge migrations towards the poles. If we're encountering some xenophobia now, imagine the social pressures when this kind of migration starts. And as Dr. Wadham said, the methane wild card is not included in these projections. These are projections based on standard models of trace amounts of methane, CO2, trace amounts of methane. So again, we are being lulled into a sense that this is a 100-year-old problem, when in fact, it could just be a couple of decades away. Now, I don't call it a conspiracy. I call it a complicity, because we are all engaged in it to some degree. Even people who know what's going on, it's very hard for us to get our arms around the changes, and it's very hard for us to rise out of our sphere of comfort and do what's required. We'll get more to that. I always like to go back to the earth, center on the mother. So let's come to a realization. Let's move a little bit from the problem, from the physical description of the problem, to the intellectual description. I speak about a global operating system, and I say our global operating system is seriously flawed. Now, no one teaches in school that there is a global operating system. They teach that operating system, but they don't talk about it in those terms. Sometimes I'll ask people, what would you say is the operating? What controls things? What's the highest level of control of reality? And it's not, when I say it's not a trick question, people often go right to it. Well, that flawed operating system is known by 2 names, money and economics. And in particular, neoclassical economics. Now, when you read in the newspaper economics, the neoclassical name has been dropped out of the record because about 100 years ago, it was installed as the only game in town by a few Wall Street financiers who bought or endowed the chairmanships of the economics departments of key business schools, and it became the vogue, and then it became the totality of pretty much what's taught. There still are other schools of thought, some of them quite good. The best one I regard as ecological economics, but I won't go into that. And when I do go into it, I say in slides, how could you possibly take an economic system that assumes that there is no planet, that the limits of the planet are irrelevant, and hope that that economic system could succeed for long, especially with a growing population, an exponentially growing population, which is following the exponentially growing money supply. We have a defective operating system. So, I'm going to challenge you. First, a concept, a meme. It's a non-physical conceptual organism. It's a thought virus. It's an idea that takes on a life of its own, and this is not just a metaphor. Try to get your arms around this one now. It becomes symbiotic with a host, a physical organism, which in this case is humanity. And it spreads across nations and generations. We teach it to our children. When we come across a society that does not have it, we teach it to them. We force it on them with lending for infrastructure, which needs to be repaid. So we shackle them with debt. Money is a meme. It's a thought virus. It controls us from the poorest to the wealthiest. It's a very problematic one because it's capable of corrupting, pun intended, and destroying its host. And just as a physical genetic virus, when it gets into your body, co-opts you, your DNA, to create more virus, money has co-opted us, individual cells in an organism we can call humanity, to do what? To make more money. How does it do it? By harvesting nature, by harvesting the photosynthetic properties and processes of nature. It fishes out the oceans, it cuts down the forests, it converts it all to cash as quickly as possible. Money promotes to the highest levels of authority and control in our system those who are best at doing what? At creating more money. Those who are best at externalizing ethical considerations, ecological considerations. It's a hypnotic force. And it gets more and more abstract in more recent years, where all of the money that all of us own in this room, perhaps a couple of percent is in our pocket. All the rest of it is ciphers in someone's computer. It's a very tenuous system. It almost fell apart in 2008. Make no mistake about that. And the fix made the problem worse. The fix was take all of this debt currency, all of this fiat currency, and do something euphemistically called quantitative easing. That is, put out a lot more debt. Make the problem, kick the can down the road. Leave it to our kids. Well, the piper's going to have to be paid soon. I noticed in the Financial Times of London when I was coming back from the climate talks in Geneva, a front page article that the Swedish Central Bank just went to negative interest rates. That is, they are paying their member banks to borrow money. Bizarre what they're trying to do to shore up a system that's failing. There's no more room to grow, but the system can't acknowledge that because all of the participants have been educated that growth is the only way. At present, we are trading this for this. What we are doing is we are converting an Eden into money. Money has co-opted us to do this. Now, let me move. I don't call them the solutions, because solutions implies we can really fix it and put the toothpaste back in the tube. I call them interventions, because that invokes the idea of a medical intervention or a military, an emergent situation. We have an emergent situation, but we can intervene, and if we intervene strongly, we can greatly affect our destiny. I don't despair. I hope that enough people will wake up in time. Now, first I'm going to give just a few of the conventional the conventional interventions that I give in other presentations, just a couple, and then I'm going to switch to the ones I composed for this evening for Totnes. First, there's a news accumulator online called The Daily Climate, and if you Google or if you search for The Daily Climate, subscribe, you'll get a form to sign up. 1 email a day, no fee, it's free, and 1 email a day which will have 15 or so headlines to solutions, to political ramifications, to the technology of the problem. Sign up for it. Start reading it. Be informed. Send articles on to other people. This is a copy from an evening, the night before I did this at the Hawaii State Capitol Auditorium. 3 times in one day I did a briefing like this. The guards said they had never seen anyone fill the audience, that auditorium, even once. And I filled it 3 times that day. And now there's a lot of energy for climate remediation, shall we say, in Hawaii. Well, this was the night before, and I took a look, and there you go, dailyclimate.org/subscribe if you want to go right to it without a search, but it's easy to find. And there was this article, U.S. Pentagon says global warming presents immediate security threat. U.S. Pentagon, they are not fools. And there was the article. Climate change poses an immediate threat to national security, with increased risk from terrorism, infectious disease, global poverty, and food shortages. Ocean rise is not the problem. The failure of the railroad on the coast nearby here a year ago, barely over a year ago, was not a freak. But it is also not the biggest problem. It's an inconvenience compared to what's coming. In my estimation, the food problem, food security, is the biggest problem. So, once you've subscribed, educate yourself, then use that information. Email and phone calls. Don't just share it with your peers, but share it with your politicians. Now, most of you probably get those very easy click and respond, click and sign petitions. Once in a while I'll do those. Mostly I'll unsubscribe because they are not nearly as effective as one phone call or one letter. And politicians all over the planet, let me just give you the data from the United States. A congressman in the United States will have a number somewhere between 10 and 50,000, and one phone call is equal to 10 to 50,000 of those click petitions, signatures. And one letter that is hard copy being mailed is equal to somewhere between 100 and 250,000, because so few people do it. In this room, now this is an extraordinary audience, so in an ordinary audience that I get, I can say confidently that if 2 or 3% will go home and do what I'm recommending, that would be nice. That would be a spike. What we need is spikes. We don't need hundreds of thousands of people to call, because your call will be multiplied by tens to hundreds of thousands of times. This is real. Your MEP. And a very pleasant young person will be at the other end of the phone and will say, "Can I help you?" And you say, "I'm a constituent, so-and-so, and I want to voice an opinion on." And so every time you get a Daily Climate article that has some ramification, political ramification, any connection, you call and complain. You've heard the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, if we could get 50 or 100 squeaky wheels calling on a particular day, that's a significant spike. And then share what you learn. There are still a lot of people that are very, very much in the complacent to ignorant, because it's not a fault. It's because our media is part of this complicity. Why does our media not contain the seriousness of the climate problem? Because it's hard to get advertisers if you're reflecting accurately what the problem is, because the solution to the problem is that we can't keep on with this growth mania. We can't keep supporting businesses whose business models are make it break as fast as possible. I lambast Apple almost every time I present. I used to love their products. Their products are good. But my phone, an iPhone 3, which still works very well, as long as I don't upgrade the operating system. So when you get an iPhone, you take the first upgrade, because that fixes the problems, but you decline the operating system upgrades after that if you want your phone to continue to work, because otherwise it will gradually degrade until you have to buy a new one 2 or 3 years later. And if that doesn't work, then they will stop supporting it altogether. That is, you'll bring it in after 5 years and they'll tell you it's legacy. Legacy? You mean you obsoleted it, right? Oh, I'm sorry, we call it legacy. It's like quantitative easement. So you need to act and inspire others to act. And it's that kind of thing which will make a difference. This audience especially. So let's go back to Reboot. And this is the unconventional part of my presentation. These are the interventions that I just put together today from what I've been doing the past few years, the ideas that I've been percolating. Again, the idea is that if you could reboot money, you could reboot the world. And this was the village, this was the town where I learned about complementary currencies. And I actually designed one. I debated putting it in the presentation, but I didn't. But I have a 1, a 5, and a 10, which is a universal local currency. That is, it's a local currency which is localized by a holographic sticker that's put on each bill. And so the same currency could be used in this town or in another town with the variation of that holographic sticker, which would not be copyable in a photocopy machine. Anyhow, so I call it rebootworld.org. And it's more than just the bills, it's more than just the currency. So let's go with some interventions that go along with this Reboot World concept. Now, the founding principle of this project, and there is a website, but it's just a splash page, because I haven't been able to take enough time to do it myself, and I haven't found the team yet to do it with me, to create the web concept. But I'm going to give you an idea of what the web concept is and hope that there's somebody in this audience who has some web design skills. So the founding principle is that hope equals action, because we face a very depressing situation. There's a gentleman by the name of Guy McPherson, a scientist, who's going to do a European tour next month. April, no, 2 months from now. And he is the direst of the scientists. He says it's all over, folks. But you can have a magnificent life. You can do Well, I don't give that message. That's a depressing message to me. A woman I met with yesterday said, maybe he's in the employ of one of the fossil fuel companies trying to dampen people's resolve to do something. I don't think that's the case. I just think his position is ill-advised. So, the rebootworld.org project is half enterprise. It's got aspects that are business-like. It's half not international, entire national. That is, we are one human nation. And until we realize that humanity is in this together, we have a problem overcoming our divisiveness. And the project is all natural and sustainable. So, there's good news. The good news, we're hiring. Conventional concept. The bad news, there's no funding. The organization, ESCO, that I work for, does not pay me. It's a nominal title, it's an honorary title. There was a wealthy businessman who has the largest business in all of Cambodia, Naga World, Naga Corp. Actually, the business is in Cambodia, the organization is in Hong Kong, the stock exchange is there. 6,000 employees, his business is a gambling casino, hotel resort casino. People say, what's the connection between that and ecology? I say, well, let's just say he understands risk. Now, he paid me for 1.5 years to work for ESCO, but then he fell out of he became disenchanted with his ESCO, so my support dried up. Well, we're not paying, but we're not paying in conventional terms. Again, we have to get off of our conventional aspect of the world where all of our decisions are conditioned by, is it worth my time? Worth means money in the conventional. Now, if you're saving humanity or saving the prospects of our survival, shall we say, saving your grandchildren's lives or the value, the ease of their lives, isn't that worth more than money? But it's not measurable in money. So we have to jump our conception, and we'll see it every day. You have to start recognizing how your decisions are conditioned by that one dimension of money and how they have to be more based in what's important. So the methodology of this project is threefold. Trinities are nice, very stable form in spiritual terms, geometric terms. Threes. Inform. We have to inform ourselves and inform others. This is the library function. This is the education function. But not education for mindless jobs in cubicles in offices somewhere. This is part of the reskilling of transition, shall we say. We have to connect with one another. This is the social aspect. And then we have to mobilize. This is the action. This is the mixed metaphor of rubber meeting road. So first, inform. So, we have a department of information. I want to break it up like that. I love playing with words. When I taught critical thinking, I would play with words all the time. Because we don't realize the cognitive associations that are implicit in the everyday language that we use. And just looking at the word in a different way invokes different parts of your brain. Information, the inward formation of ideas. Well, then we need a department of out-formation too. We have to affect the formation of ideas in society. How do we do that? Through media resources, so we need people who are good at media. Through the blogosphere. Interesting that my spell checker did not flag that word as an error. Language is fungible, it changes, it's mutable over time. We need research. We need to stay on top of what's going on. We need to deliver that across this website, rebootworld.org. We need webinars. We need live interaction where people can be participants. I love it. In today's world, our youth communicate with friends across the world by internet media. Wonderful. Skype. But they'll be in the same room texting one another. The social contact is a vital part. Excuse me, I'm going to weep again. Before I present, every time I present, I do a little meditation where I open my heart and I take the hearts of the audience in. Because I know there is a level of communication that occurs other than my words, other than my mind. It occurs here. When I taught college, I refused to do distance learning. It was more profitable for them, the school, Again, we optimize education for money, we optimize our food system for money, we optimize our healthcare system for money, not for the outcomes of education, but for the outcomes of protestations to the contrary. The optimization is done for profit, or at least collateral optimization for profit. Well, I would not teach that way because the human contact was so important. I had to feel who was in the audience to know what to say. I fed off of the energy of the thoughts, and I could tell that someone in the audience didn't understand what I was saying. Oh, Department of Corrections. No, I'm sorry, that's a mistake. Department of Connections. So, the connect aspect. No, connections. It was an intentional pun, obviously. We need to make connections. We need to find the other people who understand the problem and want to do something about it. So, again, the project needs a communications function. Social media specialists, we have to get the word out there. Social media is very powerful. I literally don't have time to tweet. The last time I tweeted, I said I got to do this more often. A pretty famous climate scientist started following me, Catherine Hayhoe. I just don't have time. Oh, social capital formation. I love that mixed metaphor. A friend, I support myself, by the way. I'm a landlord, and I have a large house I built in Hawaii, and I have rentals, and I spend my money on doing what it is I do because I feel I've got enough, and I'm protecting my children's future in doing this. But a tenant of mine told me once, he said, they say in times of financial crisis, the best investment is social capital, and that stuck with me. So, First International Phone Bank. We live in a world where it's cheap to free, if you have a plan, it's cheap to free to call. I can spend 20 cents a minute, a couple of pence, and call anywhere in the world. I can text anywhere for free. If I go in Skype, I can call for maybe 2 cents a minute. But we don't do it. And if we did, things would be different. Because politicians are sensitive to two things. You know the first one, money. And the other one is votes. And they measure those votes by spikes. So the third aspect, motivate. I like to say that this project will have a department of public works. We have to do a lot of work with the public. We have to motivate the public, motivate ourselves, motivate those of like mind. We don't have to shift the denialism measurably. When I taught, one of the subjects I taught was statistics, and I would draw that curve, that bell curve. The first day of my class, I'd draw that on the board, and I'd say, if you learn what that curve means this semester, then I've succeeded. Because that curve describes so much of human behavior. Our height, our weight, the distribution of our intellect, the distribution of who in this audience will do what I'm proposing. Now, this is an unusual audience, so it may not be the bell curve. We don't have to move the denialists. They will stay in denial. We need to move the median. We need to move the mean. So we need project specialists, because in the motivate part of this project, we're going to have essentially a bulletin board, a hyperspace bulletin board, where people can propose projects. Some of them will have a geographical foundation, so they'll need people in their area to support the project, and some of them will have a dimension that is non-geographical, that can be done anywhere in the world. I'll give you an example. I don't think I have mentioned it here. One of the projects I'm working on right now is I'm trying to move the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund to divest from fossil fuels. It's the largest pot of money owned by any nation on earth. It wise investment of a huge portion of their profits from their North Sea oil. So it was built upon oil, which creates a schizophrenia, shall we say, in society now. Norway is discussing this. How do we take this money and do something with it that will benefit our children, benefit the beneficiaries of the fund? Because we know now that many of the people who this fund is meant to benefit will not live their normal lifespan because of the damage that the fossil fuels are doing. So I am trying from outside of Norway to influence the process inside of Norway. Very possible. I won't say it's going to be easy, but they're moving in the right direction. If I get proper support for this project, I think we can nail it, because they're moving in the right direction. Fossil fuel divestment, there you go. Now, it doesn't have to be the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. It can be the local university. It can be the pension fund. It can be any pot of money that is managed on someone's behalf, unless the beneficiary has taken pains to say, I don't want my money invested in fossil fuels. It will be invested in fossil fuels. If you have a retirement plan from a company you worked for, it will be invested in fossil fuels. You have leverage. You can say, I don't want that money invested. I want you to divest from fossil fuels. And then you have to find the other people who are also beneficiaries of that fund. This is not rocket science. Now, the climate negotiations. We need judicious pressure placed upon the negotiations. Again, this is a broadly distributed geographical notion. You can put pressure on your MPs and your MEPs, saying you understand how dangerous it is and that the IPCC report does not correctly reflect that, etc. You need to educate yourself and mobilize. Again, we have to inform, communicate with one another, collaborate, and mobilize. Now, I mentioned the Pope and Patriarch Bartholomew of the Greek Orthodox Church, because these two religious leaders are very strong messengers. I did not say messengers, which is a loaded word in one particular religion, but they are messengers, and Pope Francis is messaging very loud in the right direction. And so I am trying to work with these two gentlemen this year. Easy? No, but through trying for the last 4 years, I am in the circle of influence. And I know how to get other people into that circle of influence. Now, the Pope doesn't need our votes of support necessarily, but getting the Pope to message more strenuously is one of the things that we can aim for, and I know how to do it. So, the Department of Intention. Intention is how I secularize the notion of religion and faith. Intention. That is, if you intend something, that is the precursor to it happening. And I don't know how many of you have had the experience that often you can intend something into reality. You can intend your children to do things if you're skilled with them. You don't have to tell them to pick up their socks. You can look at them and think it. Oh, okay. Right? So, lobbying the faiths of earth is very important. I know there are issues with religion, but at the core of every religion is a truth. The truth has just gotten shrouded, perhaps, over the years. In a lot of cases, that shroud has been placed there by money. But don't give up on religion per se. You have to always find what's good and what's useful in everything in the world, and capitalize on that. You know, I say capitalize. So I want you to recognize how deeply embedded in our everyday memes money is. I like to say necessity is the mother of intention. Well, we need to intend things into reality now. And even if there is no reality to the idea that you can intend something exterior to yourself to happen, you can sure as heck intend yourself to get up and do something. And if you leave here tonight with a very strong intention to take action, well, there's a good chance that you will. Now, we need a department of media. Those of you who have media skills, we need video production, we need movie production. The two are different. Okay? Video is online, movie is theater. I have a script idea. It's not a script yet, but it's a concept for what I call a docudrama. It would be very powerful if we can see it into being actually filmed. We need music production. Very penetrating, the power of music. And I have something in mind called the Reboot World Tour, an analog of this tour that Guy McPherson is going to do next month. Okay, but it's a tour where I would do these kinds of presentations with music, that is, with a musical act as a lead-off, perhaps. And when I first presented this idea to a friend, he had someone visiting who said to me, "How'd you like me to introduce you to Sting?" I said, "Whoa, are you serious?" If this thing takes off, there may be some celebrities that want to take part. I'm not going to start off with Sting. I want to have proof of concept first. We need to inform, connect, and mobilize. Our heads have been in the sand for entirely too long. There's no time, no more time for delay. We have to act. And I want to close on this very famous quotation. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. Thank you very much. I'll apologize for the couple of times I almost wept. I know I don't need to apologize, but occasionally there will be somebody in the audience who will say, "Oh, I thought your presentation was marvelous, except you're losing it." So just in case there's anybody in the audience who's uncomfortable with a grown man weeping, I take after my mother. Okay. If there are any questions, I have no concept of how long I went. I was aiming at 40 minutes. A little over? Huh? Hour and a quarter? Way off. One person left, I think. I guess they had a babysitter. Okay. Are there any questions?
What I'd like to make, Stuart, is how we can actually have interventions. And I think, politicians often come in for quite a lot of stick, and quite rightly too. But I do think that, one of the things that people can do is actually step forward for elections. We've got elections in this country in May, which is parish and town, district council, as well as the parliamentary candidates for general election. Now, most of the parliamentary candidates have already put themselves forward. But I think at the local level, we can make a difference. I mean, that's why I stepped forward, not to be some corrupt politician, but genuinely to actually try and make a difference. And, I'm privileged to be the first Green Mayor in Totnes and in Devon. But I think that, there are, you don't have to be a party, you can be an independent, but I think there's a way of stepping forward, and certainly at district council level, you can have an impact on some of the planning decisions that are being made, and that is a direct impact on sustainable development, direct impact on how we permit or protect the green space around us to be, what we want it to be. I mean, I know there's people involved here with neighbourhood planning, etc., and that's great, but I do think there's going to be gaps coming up. Think about it. Step forward to be a parish or town council or a district council. We need good people. Otherwise, it's the wrong ones making the decisions.
absolutely, not only step up to take one of those political positions, but organize to influence the elections and spread that as much as possible. Okay? Get with those people that you know in other parts of the UK. Yes?
Thank you. Very interesting talk. Thank you very much. Given that you have a finite number of breaths, perhaps actually you were wasting a breath on this audience because we agree with you. You should be talking to the Republican Party in the States. We should be talking to the Conservative Party in this country. Forget the Tea Party, because nobody will convince them of anything, and we won't bother about UKIP. But these are the people that we should be talking about, as the people that can perhaps be persuaded and brought on board. And where we tend to preach within our own comfort zones to our little groups that believe in everything we believe in, and we just reinforce our own beliefs. But we should be going out there to the non-believers and converting them, and that's more difficult.
Yes, that's considerably more difficult. Now, you remember that normal curve that I drew in the air? Well, unfortunately, in the United States, we've got two of them. Okay? And the Republican Party is a whole separate distribution. The political situation in the United States is extremely difficult because you've got a well-funded denialism. The Republican Party is so far out of the mainstream, or out of reality with its understanding of the climate problem. Because I was told that the Koch brothers, I like to call them the Koch brothers, but the Koch brothers are planning on putting over $800 million into the election, the upcoming presidential election. That's more than the Democratic Party or the Republican Party will put in on their own. We have a big problem with that now. We've got a David and Goliath thing. Yes, there's a tendency for us to talk within our groups that agree with us, but I welcomed this opportunity because, again, I'm trying to launch this platform, this Reboot World platform. And if it's effective, if I can get with this choir or get with these potential choir members and form a choir, we can maybe sing a loud chorus. Okay? So I don't think this was a waste of time at all. And I'm hoping to inspire some different part of your brain to act a little bit differently than you have. Because if you're only acting within your comfort zone, then yes, you're preaching to your own little choir. It takes getting out of your comfort zone. That's when you're going to encounter the middle ground that doesn't have your worldview. And again, anyone who wants to join me on this project, please take a card. I have business cards, plenty of them here, and get in touch with me. And I'm trying to get this movement together. It's basically not transition 2.0, it's transition 10.0, 10x. It's like the way I see it. It's a coalescing of the transition movements, but more than just local resilience, more than that. That would be a part of it. That's a subset of the concept. Anyhow, thank you. Thank you for the comment. Any other questions or comments? This gentleman.
Thank you for this evening. I had no idea what we were going to talk about tonight, and the methane problems and what have you. So this is a first for me. But I come from a practical mindset, and one of the things I think is lacking for a lot of people is, and what are the past examples, current examples, and what's out there. And I think you can have an effect against the denied if you can give hope out there. I think part of the denial is it's a comfort zone thing, really. But if you can give practical examples of what's going on, and I'd always want to say improve the science and the way that science communicates with the ordinary public, because there's too many contradictions out there. And I would like to think that what I read in the newspaper, whatever, is about as peer-tested and as accurate as it is. So that's two things, really. Yes.
Thank you. Again, going back, bringing those two comments together, going back to the idea that we only have a limited number of breaths, only a limited number of hours in the day, how do I choose to use my time most strategically? I call myself a strategist. So what is the best way to act right now? And I don't feel that's to encounter the denialists, because you only give more voice to their denial. They dig their heels in deeper. You give them a platform to yell louder. If somebody in this audience wanted to challenge me and raise a point, I have a particular way I respond to that kind of thing. Okay, I'm not going to give it away in case there's somebody just waiting to get the mic and lay into me. But the point that is the boulder that is ready to roll, that's beginning to move. Now, the climate system is often called huge and difficult to move, but once you start to move it, it's very difficult to stop. It's a boulder rolling downhill. Okay? But there's another boulder that's beginning to roll, and that's the boulder of fossil fuel divestment. There's something called the carbon bubble. I don't know if you've heard of it. The carbon bubble. Google that. The IPCC report. Again, these 2,500 scientists who get together, they're not paid. They volunteer their time. They produce a report and update it every couple of years. Last year, in September, their latest update came to the conclusion, stated, we have to leave somewhere between 60 and 80% of all the remaining fossil fuel reserves in the ground, or we risk catastrophic climate change. What? Now, society has to get its head around that. Sweden and Norway are beginning to get their heads around that. Norway, in particular, is beginning to get their head around that. Divestment is the strategic point. That's the vulnerability. I like to say the train is leaving the station, and the value of the stocks that own fossil fuels will collapse, will go down by a large amount when governments finally grapple with the fact that they have to legislate, they have to force somehow 60 to 80% of all the remaining fossil fuels to be left in the ground. We strategically need to work on that point. That's the vulnerable point. That's the point where I would put the needle and turn it if I were an acupuncturist doing acupuncture on global human system. There are others, but that's the strong one. Now, there are a lot of people in this room who are senior citizens like myself, and if you've got money in pension funds, then do that spike, start calling them and telling them, I want you to divest from fossil fuels. I want you to offer me, if it's a mutual fund, I want a choice in the Vanguard group. I want a choice of a mutual fund that's free of fossil fuels. We need to start messaging like that. They've got to get that quickly. Any other questions or comments? No, this gentleman.
I was just going to refer to something you spoke about earlier, and it seems to me that the problem the Western world has been facing is that we've gradually moved towards the glorification of goods. It used to be that most of the population went to church every Sunday. Now they go to the supermarket every Sunday. And this is because we have become a society which glorifies take. We have rights for this, we have rights for the other, we take this, we take that, we expect this, we expect that. And in fact, I was quite surprised in the early days of David Cameron's prime ministerial position when he said that we have to look at our responsibilities as well as our rights. And when society starts honouring people who give rather than people who take, only then will we have an alternative to the monetary basis of life.
You'd get a lot of amens if you were standing up and saying that publicly. Yes, yes. The ethics has gone out of society. The current secular religion of the planet is consumerism. Well, we have to counter that trend in whatever way we can. It will come apart. The consumerist mentality will come apart. We need to, as transition says, do it in a smooth manner if possible.
Thank you, and thank you for drawing attention to methane, which is often forgotten in this discussion. Carbon dioxide is the main topic of the conversation. The other molecule I was going to ask about was oxygen. I think there are 3 or 4 places on Earth where we've shown a fall in oxygen levels over the years, and this seems to be a very convincing point when people who deny the concept of climate change, for which carbon burning by men is a factor. Showing that oxygen levels are falling is quite a powerful argument. I wonder whether you've got any information on that. I read about it, but I've not actually seen data recently. The question is, can you tell me anything about oxygen levels in the atmosphere falling?
Simple answer, no. I haven't studied that one. I won't pretend to know things that I don't know. I've been studying the greenhouse gas problem. I've been studying other aspects of the problem, but water vapor is increasing in the atmosphere, I can tell you. There's about 4 to 5% more moisture in the atmosphere now than there was about 50 years ago, which means when there are downpours, you get much more of it. Britain is going to become a very soggy place in the coming decades. But I know we are challenging the oxygen production of the planet by harvesting the rainforest and by acidifying the oceans. You know, they talk about the forests being the lungs of the planet. Well, they're one lung. The other lung is the phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton is being killed off by our acidification of the ocean, by forcing carbon dioxide into the ocean. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more of it dissolves in the ocean. And so it's a very complex problem. I've got one clip which I didn't use today of Dr. James Hansen, who's the climate scientist who's been saying this the loudest and the longest. He was the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Earth and Space Science until George Bush Jr. removed the Earth from the title. So it became space science. So again, we have a Republican problem in the United States. And Dr. Hansen, he says, we scientists are not doing a good job of communicating this emergency to the public. That's the paraphrase. It's difficult to take complex concepts and reduce them to terms that people can get their heads around and then excite them enough to do something about it. When I went out on the street in the polar bear costume today, I was kind of a little dismayed by, do you have time for a talk? My colleagues were giving them out and interacting. I was in mime. But people were like shopping. They were out there shopping and, that's why I asked, and I'm very glad that you two gentlemen came today. Thank you. Any other questions or hopefully a question I can answer?
I don't know anything about chemistry, but you were saying about the damage caused by methane and the need to keep carbon fuels in the ground. If we're going to use carbon fuels anyway, is there any way that by burning methane and using that as a fuel and keeping other fuels in the ground, that it would actually lessen the effect of it if it's only something less harmful when it's burned than as it is raw?
Okay, very good question. And I have to say the answer is yes and no. If we could capture that methane, it would be much better to be burning it as a fuel. We would be harvesting the energy from it and reducing the danger, the climate danger, very quickly. But in fact, it's being emitted in very inhospitable conditions, very hostile conditions in the Arctic. Remember I said Dr. Shakova almost died because they were up there researching this when a storm hit. Okay, so you can't put out like a rubber mat over the ocean and harvest it. I won't say can't, it would be an engineering feat to figure out how to, because it's coming out from the mud. It's not coming out in one place. Okay? If it could be harvested, yes, it would be an alternative fuel for a while. But what scientists are actually saying is that we actually have to try to figure out how to cool the Arctic, artificially cool the Arctic. Now the term geoengineering is a dirty word, got a lot of, because humanity has a history of screwing things up. But there are more and more scientists saying we have to put that one on the table. We have to look, burning, don't you think that burning 200 million years of stored carbon in about 150 or 200 years is geoengineering? What do you think it is? We burned it to run our engines. That's geoengineering. We move mountains to get the stuff out now. Well, we need to start thinking about how to cool the Arctic to prevent the methane from coming out. Now the methane, the way, I'll give you a bit of chemistry, the way that it degrades is that when it comes out, it combines with hydroxyl radicals, the OHs in the sky, in the atmosphere, and it becomes CO2 and H2O. So the CH4 basically combines with oxygen and hydrogen in the atmosphere, and it becomes less powerful greenhouse gases because water vapor is a greenhouse gas. You know, one of the scariest things that I came by early on was Dr. Stephen Hawking made a statement in 2006. And I know in this audience I don't have to say, you all know who Stephen Hawking is. By the way, Dr. Weddams, who I've shown twice tonight, his office is across the courtyard from Stephen Hawking, so I was looking in the window to see if Dr. Hawking came in. I wanted to go around and try to speak with him. Because in 2006, he said at a conference he was at, through his voice unit, I'm afraid that the Earth might end up like Venus at 250 degrees centigrade, raining sulfuric acid. Now that was maybe shooting from the hip, but as we evaporate water, it becomes another feedback, and we could potentially evaporate the oceans and sterilize this planet. That would be the biggest sin of all.
I'm just very intrigued by the other myth about chemtrails behind aeroplanes. Do you think there's any traction in that idea? That chemtrails behind aeroplanes, that it's a...
Good question. Now, there are contrails, which is the normal exhaust from an airplane, and then there's something called chemtrails, where the plane is actually intentionally spewing something else. I will not comment on whether it's real or not, or what my feelings are. There is research being conducted. I don't know if it's limited, I don't know if it's broad-based, I don't know. But I do know, I used to at my presentations regularly say that the worst thing that ordinary people do is get on an airplane. And I stopped saying that because a colleague of mine, a videographer in London, in fact, Nick Breeze, who introduced me to the work of Shakova and Similetov and Models, he said, after 9/11, when they stopped all of the air traffic for a couple of days, at least in the US, I don't know if it was in Europe also. The US only. They realized that if we stopped flying, that the Earth would heat up almost immediately by 0.5 degree. And that's just from the normal exhaust, because not only are we putting the bad stuff, CO2, up there, but we're putting particulates up there, sulfur dioxide, whatever, that increase the reflectivity of the atmosphere, the albedo, they call it. So we're shrouding the Earth with a haze that's keeping us a little bit cooler by flying. So we can't stop flying. So we're damaging. We can't stop flying until we figure out how to start pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Now, I know Branson offered a $25 million prize for anybody who could come up with a commercially viable way of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Excuse me, it's called trees. Just stop cutting them, for God's sake. Good question, but there was one more.
I suppose the science and the shock of the issue to do with the climate seem to be at a different level from how we deal with economics, and so it's really hard to sort of make the connection or imagine how we would make other people, politicians, make that connection. It's almost like you say, yes, there's a problem, and then on the other hand, it's, well, we've got to live, I've got to feed my family, I've got to do these for my constituents, whatever it is. There's a sort of, we seem to be living with two sets of assumptions at once, but not being able to make the connection. And I wonder how you can keep that transition going, rather than just we can acknowledge there's a problem, but somehow not make the connection with the money and the economics, and or dare to tackle that.
I'm not sure if I understand the core of the question, so if I don't answer it the way you've asked it, then ask it again. But I just went to the negotiations in Geneva. Now, they do one famous one every year in November, December, and then they do several during the year, which you don't hear about. There were no journalists there. I went hoping to do a couple more of these signature press briefings that I do, but there were no journalists there. But I spoke with a friend there who is an advisor to Micronesia. He's an American lawyer, very smart, very knowledgeable. He is the lead negotiator for Micronesia to the Montreal Protocols. Okay, that's the treaty that took the chlorofluorocarbons out that were killing the ozone. Okay. But he's only an assistant to them in climate. And I was trying desperately to do an intervention, what they call an intervention at the UN meetings, which means you get the microphone for 5 minutes. And I was wanting to do an intervention which said, basically, are you guys for real? I mean, here you're negotiating on something that even if you come to an agreement is not sufficient to fix the problem. That's the intervention. And I was going to do it technically by citing documents and numbers and whatnot. And my friend said, no, you got it wrong. That's not the intervention. I said, what do you mean? He said, they already know. They didn't become politicians by not knowing. They became politicians by knowing and being able to ignore what they know. So, how do we get them to acknowledge what they know or to act on what they know? And that doesn't mean you have to master the science. It means you have to be the squeaky wheel. You have to say, I know there's a problem. I and my neighbors know. And guess what? We vote, and we are not voting for you because you don't. Okay?
I think we might say, yes, there's a problem with the climate or environment, and people might acknowledge there's a problem, but meanwhile we also get habituated by business as usual. If we've got to have roads, haven't we? Even if we personally believe that's not the case, it's really hard to sort of feel that we're threatening the very way our society has established. So leaving people without anything to go on.
Again, that's why I call it not a conspiracy, but a complicity, because we are all part of this. Okay, but we can step outside of it. We can. We can stop buying all the throwaway stuff. Okay? It's as simple as just stop supporting that model. And then, as I say, be a squeaky wheel and try to wake other people up to the things that they don't see. It's funny, the word paradigm, it's the way things are. Don't have to be that way, but it's the way they are. And paradigms are hard to see. Paradigms are like habits. And we pay lots of money to specialists to help us see our habits. They're called psychologists and psychiatrists because we can't see them, right? And of course, if you have a good friend, then maybe the good friend can help you see them. You just need somebody outside of your paradigm to see your to help you see your paradigm. And a good couple, a functioning relationship, is one where you could help the other person see their. Now, we need to somehow develop that sense, the ability to break our own paradigm, to learn how to break our habits, and to then help others learn how to break their habits. Because we are all part of business as usual. And you know, when I said that for my money, here it is in the language again, for my money, the soft spot, the strategic spot is divestment. Well, we're kind of tricking ourselves. Because if divestment happens, then yes, we will leave 60 to 80% of the fossil fuels in the ground. And if we don't go to renewable sources of energy quickly enough, it will mean we are constrained in what we can do. We can't just jump in the electric car and go somewhere unless we've made that conversion. Okay? Well, the sweet spot is to get that divestment going. And for me, the sweet spot is to get the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund to say, you take that 5% of the fund that's invested in fossil fuels and you invest it in renewables instead, and you've got something that will both be more profitable than fossil fuels in a world that's waking up to this conflict. Business as usual doesn't work anymore. But yes, we are trying to change business as usual. I hope I responded to your question, Rona. Any other questions or comments?
You said about flying. Would you still recommend people not to fly and be an example in that? And I mean, I know also people say that actually the meat industry is creates more CO2, and so being vegetarian, not flying, setting example, is that also very important?
I still say don't fly. Now, I don't say it as much because immediately the people who want to nitpick with me will say, well, then why do you fly so much? My response to that is, if you flew for the reasons that I fly, then I would encourage you to fly. But I still say we will have to. There's a mathematical theorem. The mathematical theorem says that if you're going to go from rising to falling at some point you have to reach the top. Now that's common sense, but there's actually a deep mathematical theorem that there is an inflection point at the top. Well, we won't achieve that inflection point from rising emissions to falling emissions until we reach that top, which means we have to decline. Okay, so yes, if you have a mind to restrict your flying, to fly less, I mean, yes, if your grandmother's dying and you want to go, but to go to skiing in the Alps is arguably something that you could do without. Okay, meat, yes. I don't say, now meat is what's called, pun intended, a sacred cow. There are a lot of sacred cows. You know, by the way, Al Gore, who used to not handle that one well, and I know he's got a lot of detractors, he's gone vegetarian as far as I know. May even be vegan, but it would shock me to hear that. You know, and he lost a lot of weight in the process too. He's looking much better than he did for a while. I'm sorry? Well, now, people take shots at Al Gore, but he runs a business. His business, the Carthage Group, is run out of his home. Okay, so it's, I mean, and how many bathrooms does the Queen have? Yeah. So we don't need to do these cheap shots at people, you know, even though, yes, everyone has, you know, I'm sure you can find some skeletons in my closet. You know, I probably do things that I shouldn't be doing. I'm not vegetarian. Because if I were, I have a dairy intolerance and a wheat intolerance and an intolerance to vegetables called nightshades, which means when I go traveling, If I don't allow myself to eat chicken and fish, then I'm up a creek. Okay? So, but there are many things. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. And it's an all of the above time in history for us. If you've got a good idea to reduce your ecological footprint, now is the time to haul it out. As crazy as it may seem to be, now is the time to try to exercise it, to refine it, to get others to adopt the idea. That's this website I'm trying to create. I want people part of that. It's a social network with a purpose. It would be a Facebook for a purpose of changing business as usual. And if somebody has a crazy idea, they can run it up the flagpole and get people to help them refine it. That's the concept behind that website. So.
I'm trying.
Yes, no. There's somebody behind you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Stephen. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, thank you. This isn't so much a question. I feel a bit nervous speaking, but myself and a friend are going to be facilitating a course called Active Hope based on Joanna Macy work, starting just over a week's time. And we're just asking for any donations for people to come along, not just people to come. We've got about 8 people coming. We've got about another 4 to 6 places if people want to come along. Just see me afterwards. It's about space, all this sort of things that we've been talking about tonight, and how to face what's going on without going crazy, and with support. And we're going to be using the book and our heart-based responses to the book to see what we can do as a community. So if you're interested, just come and I'll take your email. Thank you.
Yeah, I would recommend that highly for anyone who is confronting now that tendency to be depressed about our prospects. And one of the things that's been found by psychologists when they've studied environmentalists who burned out, who've gone into severe depression, is that they come out of the depression when they get back into action, when they start taking action. Okay, so don't wallow in despair. Do something. Get up and do something. That's to me the strongest antidote to the desperation. I've been crying for the past 2 days on and off. You can ask my host. Last night I was weeping in her house. The friend I stayed with in Painswick, near Stroud. The night before I was crying in her home. What's with this crying? It's because I have all this very dire information that I struggle with every day, but I keep working on it, and I keep saying, well, I'm not going to go down without a fight. I'm a warrior, and I'm just trying to find the warrior spirit in all of us.
It's not the most positive thing we can do to envision a brighter future, a planet where everybody respects the Earth, because each of us are capable of thinking. Modern science proves that thought has an energy which is transmittable and creative. There was a group in Brighton called the Fountain Group about, I think in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and at that time Brighton was very troubled with a lot of crime and difficulties in the town. And a group of people got together without any contact to the problems, but they just thought positively for a number of months, twice a week, and the crime rate dropped dramatically. Positive thought is the best thing we can use, particularly when we're elderly.
Yes, thank you. I tried to cover that in what I called intention. Okay, we need to intend this, but we need to do more than that, because the machinery that's destroying the planet, it's going to be hard to intend them out of doing that. So I think we need to take action also, but the intention is very, very important. Very important. That's action on the causal plane of reality. Okay? I don't want to get too airy-fairy with you all here tonight, but that's moving things from a very high level. That same phenomenon was noted, I think there's the Maharishi Institute, or there was a university established in the US by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when he was alive, and they were trying to do this in Washington, D.C., and actually the crime rate in Washington, D.C. dropped during the summer that they were doing this program of meditation in Washington and focusing on Washington from around the world. It was quite interesting. The police documented that something had happened. So,
thank you. I was interested in your example from Norway and the government's response there, and I'd be quite interested in ending on a more optimistic note as to whether there are other governments around the world that you feel are moving in the same direction.
Scandinavia is the best in terms of the group of governments that are moving in a better direction. Norway is the leader. Norway's out front of the pack. The left-leaning parties in Norway, I asked a young person from Norway who I met in Geneva at the talks there to give me her take on the 8 parties that are part of the parliament, because my strategy is to approach the entire parliament, and I have all 169 parliamentarians' names and email addresses and parties in a spreadsheet that I gleaned off of the internet, and I'm going to send them individual emails, one by one. Even though I can batch 55 with a BCC, a blind carbon copy, I'm going to send it individually, one by one. It'll take me a couple hours, so I have something better to do with my limited breath on Earth. And but the liberal-leaning party, when I asked her, okay, how on a scale of 0, extremely conservative, to 10, extremely liberal, how would you rate them, these parties? And we had to go to rating them in 2 terms, within the Norwegian spectrum and compared to the rest of the world. And so a party that was only maybe 6 liberal in Norway would be 8 liberal anywhere else in the world. Okay, so Norway is ahead of the curve. That's one of the reasons I want to leverage Norway, because if this sovereign wealth fund starts to divest that much, and by the way, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, which was also based on a fossil fuel fortune, announced its divestment in 2014. So the train is leaving the station. We're just trying to make it go a little faster. If the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund divests, that will be very significant. Power of intention. I spent 2 weeks in Norway working on this, circling and finding out, doing reconnaissance. Okay? And about a week or 10 days after I left, there was an announcement in the press that from the Norwegian government, that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund had over the past year divested from 114 fossil fuel companies and cement companies. And a friend of mine in New York who knew what I was doing wrote me and said, "Did you have a hand in this?" And I told him I couldn't say no, I couldn't say yes. I can't say, because I stood outside of the parliament is called the Stortinget, and I stood outside the Stortinget when I couldn't get in to make an appointment with a parliamentarian. I stood out there for about 15 minutes on a very cold morning, beaming intention into the building, literally. And then I went on to try to get an appointment. I'd been given a phone number to call, that kind of thing. So yes, it's all of the above moment. We have to do everything. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I'll give you another anecdotal answer. I attended a talk in Thailand years ago by the local head of McKinsey & Company. They are an international, not an accounting firm, a think tank. I'm sorry? A consultancy. And they have done a lot of research on climate change and policy, and so the head of the McKinsey company in Thailand was asked, what do you feel is the best nation on earth in terms of their response to climate change? And he thought for a moment and he said, California. The joke is California is not a nation, but it's big enough to be a nation. California could be a nation of its own. It's so huge. So there are pockets that are going faster and further than many, and there are pockets that are not, and there are pockets that are taking steps backwards. But it's usually because of limited intervention by money. Canada going the wrong direction because Prime Minister Harper is in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. Okay. Now I hope I'm not saying anything libelous, but any other?
So I just have a question about a couple of things about the divestment and keeping fossil fuels in the ground. Is the idea that the fossil fuel companies lose enough of our investment that they'll then invest in renewables and then we invest in them again? Is that the strategy long term? Or what happens when we take all our money? And I guess one of the things that preoccupies me is that most of the oil that's under the ground isn't under this ground, it's under Saudi Arabia and Iraq and the Levant and not exactly, and Russia, not places that are very friendly to the West, and a lot of this message is coming from the West.
It's a very complex world we live in. You had several questions mixed in there. In terms of divestment, we need to strand those assets. Okay, now there have been many industries where there have been stranded assets, where the technology has moved, and I mean, cameras, when digital cameras came in, how many SLRs were there? How many film cameras were there that were produced that had to be destroyed? They became stranded assets. It always happens when technology shifts that there are assets that are stranded. But in this case, we need to voluntarily strand an asset because to not do so threatens all of civilization. That's a different question. So we need to force the issue. And that will be a complex issue of pressure by those people who invest in those fossil fuel companies, saying, I will not invest in you because your business plan is destroying the viability of life on Earth. Now, what do I do with that money instead if I'm not investing in you? Yes, the best thing to do is to invest in renewable energy to fill the gap, because the world is hungry for energy. Right? The Chinese found, and a lot of people blame the Chinese, don't blame the Chinese. The Chinese arguably are doing more to turn themselves around in terms of what nations are acting. They have a very complex situation also now. And they're producing the crap for us, so that's a lot of their footprint. But the Chinese experience was that for every doubling of the install base of photovoltaic cells, every time you double the amount that you put up there, the price drops 25%. And so they've been putting a lot into their own country. I mean, they put $1 billion in, I'm told. They created $1 billion worth of product and got it out there, and they found that the price dropped 25%. So they said, okay, let's see if this relationship holds. And they put $10 billion into producing solar panels and pumped them out there. People complain, oh, they flooded the market, they put us out of whatever. Okay, that's all but they found that the relationship held. That for every doubling of the install base, the price drops 25%. So what we've got to do is start putting them up now. I know that England is not the sunniest place, but in riding a train out from London, well, actually, my friends drove me from London to Stroud, but from Stroud here, I did pass houses with PV panels, so I know it's not a complete. There you go. Good. Thank you. Now, when I put the PV panels on my house, it was a long payback. Okay, in terms of ROI, return on investment, it was not the best investment. The tax breaks weren't as good as they are now. If I'd waited, if I'd only waited 15 years, I could have. Well, in that 15 years, I saved how much money? And I saved how many tons of carbon dioxide? So it may not be a decision that makes financial sense. If you only make your decisions based upon financial sense, you're missing the point. You've got to start making it on another invisible dimension. Okay, we have to make that dimension quantifiable. Somehow, when I gave this briefing to the Swedish Royal Academy, the slides that I had started with time and money as the X and Y axis. And at one point when I showed that square, inside the square of time and money, I showed the destruction that was occurring overlaid on that graph. And then my video went away, and I laid that money down, and then I popped up another axis, and that axis was the axis of ethics and ecology. So I put an E on that, M on money, E on ethics and ecology. And then I showed a video in there that was obviously the things that we need to value if we're going to survive. We have to create that. And until we can do it in a quantifiable way, we have to do it in our hearts, in our minds. We have to do it voluntarily. Bite the bullet and do the thing that doesn't make complete financial sense. And that's more than intention. That's a demonstrable example for society.
I just wanted to go back to the question over there of, what government.
Please, if you need to leave us your email address. Thank you.
Yeah, over what governments in the world are doing well. And I thought of Bhutan. I thought probably most people here have heard of it, but it's a small Buddhist kingdom in the Himalayas. And they, a few years ago, decided that the best measure they wanted to measure their society was not GDP, gross domestic product or national product. Anyway, the economic one. They do it on gross national happiness. And I think if other nations could take that example and recognise, as you're very rightly saying, that money is not the root of happiness.
That's a very good example. I personally feel that it was wrong messaging to call it happiness. It's too easy for the bureaucrats to sweep that. Happiness, that's. Okay, but there are other very serious indicators. When I say serious, there's a gross progress indicator that came out of Stanford. There have been several that are very good, and they're expanding there's a lot of discussion in government of getting off of the GDP thing, but the bankers are still pushing it. Okay, the pure diehard financial people are still saying grow. So, we're beginning to lose audience. Please, if you let us have your email address, I will send you one email and ask you if you want to opt in, so we're not going to spam you. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to congratulate you, Stuart, on all the work that you do on our behalf. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think we're really lucky to have had your presentation tonight, but not only that, your special presentation for the Totnes audience. I'd like to say actually that, in fact, there's probably people in this room that aren't perhaps as sort of knowledgeable as we can assume. Often we assume people come together in Totnes and everybody's on that same wavelength, and there's people here that I don't recognise tonight, and I'm not saying I should recognise everybody, but there's new faces, and apart from that, I think that's brilliant. It's actually, there's an assumption perhaps that everybody's up to speed, and I think, in fact, you've given us a lot of challenges tonight, and I think it's brilliant that you've challenged us to make interventions ourselves. And I'd just be interested in a little bit of a straw poll. Who's going to feel inspired to make a kind of intervention in their own lives or the lives around them? I personally feel inspired from this tonight to do something to actually up my act a bit and do something a bit more. And I would say that in Totnes we are very well placed. We have a kind of a platform because we have a lot of the world's eyes on us in Totnes through the great work that Transition Town Totnes has been doing, and the fact that they've focused a lot of attention on what is possible, what we can do, the stories we can tell, and taken that in the viral transition movement means that a lot of people come here. And again, I think there's a perception that a lot of the people that come are what was called the transition pilgrims, which is perhaps a bit rude, but anyway, a lot of people do come here to sort of see what's happening in transition. But in fact, our experience this afternoon on the street was that a lot of people were from all over the place. They were really uninterested in this talk on climate change. And some guy said to me, as you were saying about the China, he said to me, "Oh, well, blame the Chinese, they're the problem, not us." But so there's a lot of challenges, and I think our perceptions of how we can act and what we can do, I think is, it's there, and I think there's a lot we can do. And I'm just,
You made me think of something. Anyone who leaves their email address, when I send you an email, that one email asking whether you want to be opt-in to a list, that doesn't get, actually I should write to it more. I will send out a document which you can find on the internet, but I'll send you a copy of it, a file copy that you can read and share. Okay? It's called The Creation of Society's Shared Hallucinations. And it's a 2.5-page read with about 1.5 pages of citations. And that 2.5 pages really kind of goes, oh my God, as to why it's also, why society is ignoring the obvious, this complicity I talk about. Okay? So I'll send you that and encourage you to read it and share it with others, because it's a real awakening to read this 2.5 pages. And I found that on a website called Resilience, which was inspired arguably by transition.
So I commit to share that with my fellow councillors on Town Council and my fellow councillors on District Council, who will probably have their eyes open a little bit. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for everything you've shared with us tonight. Thank you. Give him a very warm round of applause.